Welcome back to another episode of GraysMatter podcast. So, as longtime listeners may be aware, the usual format of this podcast is for me and two or three of my co-hosts to talk about society and current events from a perspective other than your stereotypical podcaster. That is, not from a cishet white male's perspective. But another thing that I've been meaning to do is to sit down and talk to other POC folks in the geek community about our experiences. And so with that in mind, today we have a special guest, writer and cosplayer Sonni de Soto. Thank you for being here today, Sonni.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, Sonni de Soto, she, her pronouns, and I am a cosplayer, although very amateur cosplayer, definitely not professional. Let's set those expectations real low. But I am a professional writer. I have currently right now, yesterday you were asking me questions. You were like, I don't know how many books and stories you have out. And I'm like, you know what? Neither do I. So I had to count them up. So I have one full-length novel out there, one short story collection of just all my stories, 17 short stories included in various anthologies out there. I have 3 short stories that'll be coming out later this year, early next year, hopefully. You never know with the publishing industry. And then I have 6 completed novels and novellas and a slew of short stories, including my monster romance novella that is free until the end of October for Halloween, and then my Love and Lockdown short story collection that is available for free on my Patreon. So all sorts of things. I always feel like there's like balls up in the air all the time when it comes to publishing.
Oh, most definitely. Well, I'll make certain to put links to all those in the show notes. So
yes, please,
everybody, please go check her out. She is fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm always happy whenever I see a like from you, and I'm like, oh, yay.
Well, I love seeing your stuff on the Instagrams.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful to be able to, be friends with you on Facebook.
Yeah, it's always fun. I always like seeing your content on there. I always think that you have so many smart things that are on your Facebook and whatnot. It's always interesting to follow you.
When we first became Facebook friends, at first I was wondering if you were sharing stuff from my page or if it was just coincidental that we had, virtually identical timelines.
Yes, I actually remember once, like in the very beginning, you were like, I'm so sorry, I'm real leftist. So if that's going to be a thing, I'm so sorry up front. And I'm like, oh, honey.
Yes, I'm so glad it worked out.
But I think we also share a lot of mutual friends, which is probably where we're like cultivating all our material from.
Very much so. I was kind of surprised, actually, that we hadn't met in person before.
Yeah, that was kind of a thing. I don't think I've ever met you outside of con, but we do share a lot of mutual friends. I think it's just different, like everybody's got the different communities that they hang out with, but they all end up coinciding here and there. So, and the geek community in Minnesota is it's so well, like very close knit.
It is. Yes, we met the one time at Convergence, at the panel you were on.
Yeah.
And it was, come on, brain. The etiquette one.
Oh, it was like social media etiquette or something like that, wasn't it? Or God, I've been on so many panels, I don't even know.
The dating and romance one.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's one.
Right. Yeah.
The name of it escapes me now. I even wrote it down, but I didn't write it down today, and so it's not with my notes. That's thinking ahead for you.
I know, preparedness is not necessarily my strong suit.
Yeah. So, how would your family and friends describe you? Like, are they also, well, more your family than your friends? Your family also, are they also geeks as well?
I mean, immigrant parents is always an interesting thing because I think they're so hard to label, particularly with American labels on there. They exist within almost the periphery of American culture, because they kind of have their own thing. And then to have the cultural barrier between, their culture versus American culture, and then sort of looking in and again, having children, because we were raised to be, me and my brother, we were raised very American, like almost neither of us speak the language. They tried very much to be like, we're going to assimilate you guys super hard so that you guys fit into society. So Me and my brother were very up on, pop culture and whatnot, although different forms of it. He's much more the jock. I'm much more the geek. But my mom very much, she likes watching the things that I watch, even if I don't quite always know how much she actually takes in. But she likes watching like the superhero stuff, and she's less on the supernatural stuff because that creeps her out. Like she's definitely the type of Catholic who, if I'm watching a horror movie, like does the sign of the cross during the scary parts.
I see.
And then my dad, he was more of an intellectual. Like the geek side I got from him was very much like we would do intellectual debates with each other on various things, and that was always something that I really enjoyed, and I miss now that he's gone. But that was more his thing. He was much less into the fiction and whatnot, but much more into the like, let's puzzle out this philosophical idea. So that was his kind of geekdom.
I did not know that your parents were first-gen immigrants.
Oh, immigrants. Yeah. No, I'm the first-gen American.
First-gen American. Your parents being the immigrants.
Yeah.
I was unaware of that.
Yeah. They came over from the Philippines.
I was going to guess that with the name De Soto, based off of how Spanish and then subsequent American colonialism happened in the past 100 years. Yeah. And then the nursing programs that the U.S. started to get more Filipinos to come over.
Yep. Both my parents came over on those kinds of visas. My dad on a technological one and my mom on a nursing. So
yeah, I cannot say I'm surprised by that.
No.
Considering what we did to the Philippines and the pretext that the United States used to get their fingers on the Philippines.
Yeah. Complicated politics.
Yeah.
To say the least.
It's also disheartening on how that does not get brought up, at least when I went to school. We did not talk about that in school.
No, going to school, like, again, I'm old enough to be, when I was growing up, when you told someone you were Asian, it was so are you Chinese or Japanese? And that was the only two options that people knew. Like, for the longest time, if I tried to tell them I was Filipino, they had no idea that country even existed.
Even here in Minnesota.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Oh,
and
wow.
I mean, like, when I grew up, I was probably one of anywhere between 3 or 5 people of color, like kids of color, in my entire grade.
I only ask, even here in Minnesota, because
we have a high Filipino population. We do.
Yeah, that's part of it. But then thinking back to my elementary school, all of my classmates who are Asian, who I remember, were all Korean. Except for one person who was Indian.
Yeah, yep.
So I can't think of... No, correction, I think one was Filipino, come to think of it, and one was Japanese. But I can't recall anyone who was Chinese.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's less of, like, the people you meet and just the cultural influence in it. Because, again, like, when I was young, Asian people were just we were so invisible to the majority of American culture, is that just, like, people didn't know that, they literally didn't know that, like, there were more different kinds of Asian people out there than just Chinese and Japanese. That was the only that they could recognize. And then eventually I would get more and more. But the thing is, the Philippines we're such a tiny little island nation that it took a while for Americans to, be introduced to that culture. Like, I would get, particularly because I'm a much darker skinned Asian. I'm definitely a brown skinned Asian girl. So I got a lot of actually my high school did not know that I was Asian. My entire schooling did not know I was Asian until I realized the week before graduation, when they were going over, like, here's what's going to be printed out in the, graduation pamphlet, booklet, whatever. And I was down as Latina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They didn't even bother to ask.
No, and I'm pretty sure that was just my records throughout my entire schooling, was just I was put down as Latina. They just assumed because of my last name, and I'm assuming the color of my skin, because I, like, for the longest time, like I said, I had to tell people I was Asian before they would guess the Japanese or Chinese one. Like, most of the time people would either assume I was Native, a lot of Latina, or like some mix of race. Like, they just couldn't quite picture, like, what exactly was I. And even still, that continues. Like, the odd thing I found is that whatever shade of brown is currently in the news, that is what people think I am. So like when they talk about like immigrants coming from, Mexico to invade the country, everyone thinks I'm Mexican or some kind of flavor of Latinx. And it's just like, I mean, it's fine, but it is just one of those things where it's just I get yelled at in all sorts of weird ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I can't say I'm surprised by that part.
Yeah.
Especially after, if you remember, post 9/11.
Yeah, that was a hard time.
Yeah.
That was incredibly difficult. I still don't like. So many people talk about the fear of flying, and I'm like, I am fine once I'm in the plane. Once I'm on the plane, I am fine. But stepping into any airport still makes me, it makes me nauseous.
Yes, it's the pre-flight stuff that's scary.
Yep. No, I'm on a list. I already know that because the first time I traveled alone in college, I was doing study abroad, and I got stopped every single time. And I'd never traveled alone, and I hadn't traveled since I was a really young child, and I just got stopped everywhere. And they were like, one of the TSA people was like, if you look at your ticket, there's 3 asterisks at the bottom of your ticket. That means you're a mandatory stop. So every time you reach a checkpoint, you will always get stopped for the rest of your life. And I was like, oh, good to know.
Yeah, that's America for you.
Yep.
Land of the free. Sarcasm.
I mean, I've never had a TSA agent ever be rude to me or ever be mean. In fact, they actually are. And I mean, I have incredible privilege because I am a 4'11" kind of cutesy looking girl. So even though I'm a mandatory stop every time, they're always very careful and very polite to me. So I'm grateful for the small privileges I have. But it is always just one of those things where it's just like, oh, so that's what my government thinks of me. Mm-hmm. Good to know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Lordy. Do you see that crossover much into aspects of the geek community?
Like the geek community is always interesting because I think particularly my experience within the Minnesota geek community has been always very welcoming. They're always trying their best to be very open, I think. And that's always really nice. And again, I think a lot of that privilege comes from being, tiny, cute, and Asian. The issues I see with the geek community, and God bless people, I don't think it ever comes from a place of malice, but it's always that over ingratiatingness of being they try to ask a lot about my culture, and I'm like, oh honey, I was raised here, I'm super American. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely if I were to go to the Philippines, I would definitely be seen as a banana, white on the inside, yellow on the outside. And I'm like, oh yeah, we did not learn much about our culture because again, my parents wanted us to assimilate so we would fit in as much as possible. So it is always one of those things. And it's like, oh yeah, that's my experience of being of color in this country, is that idea of I should fit in, but I don't always. Mm-hmm. That, and also it's also weird because I mean within the geek community, just because we haven't always had the greatest relationship with cultural appropriation, you always see people in Asian garb of costumes or whatever, and personally, I mean if you did it and you're not doing it in an offensive way, I'm fine with it. But it's always really funny when they'll be fine and then they'll see me and there's this look of oh no on their face.
Oh my, yes.
And I'm like, it's fine. And most of the time, it's not even my culture you're appropriating. It's fine. Mm-hmm. Just don't be weird about it, and we'll get along just fine. Do
you get a lot of people preemptively trying to fight you about cultural appropriation? About
yes.
whether it does exist or not, and whether it's okay
yes.
or not?
Oh, I get I think that is one of the things, particularly when you're the only person of that particular branch of color that they know, you become the anointed expert, and it's oh no, I speak only for myself for no one else. I'm no community's voice, I promise you that. I do not have the authority for that. But so many times it's one of those things where people want you to dissect it and absolve them, or even not even necessarily even absolve. I think they just want to know one way or another if they're doing the bad.
Yeah, that is a heavy weight to be put upon a person.
Yeah,
and it's really unfair.
It really is, and it's also one of those things where it's just oh man, I don't know. I'm very much of the, because again, for people who don't know me, I'm also big within the kink world. That's where a lot of my writing is, and it comes from being in the kink community. So I very much have the philosophy in my head of, as long as you're not actually harming anybody, I don't care. Like, just don't harm people. If someone says that they're being harmed by something you did, then stop and don't do it again. But as long as you're not harming anybody, I'm cool with whatever you do.
May I ask how you found yourself in the kink community or a kinkster?
Oh, I am one of those people who I used to tie up my toys and do all this. I'm definitely that kind of stereotype of where I didn't know what the name of anything was, of like what kink was or what anything like that. But even as a child, like there was that instinct in my head, and like, oh God, what was it? I remember distinctly going to my second grade library and just futzing around in like the old folklore section, and there was a book for the Seven Swan Princes, and it was not appropriate. Like, I was definitely from a poorer school where you just got books donated, and whatever book they could get their hands on, they would shove in the library and be like, look, we have books. And so it was definitely not child appropriate, because there was definitely nudity in there and lots of bondage and lots of like really kinky stuff. And I just remember, even as a second grader, I would just go to the library and just look at that book every day. So I was definitely that child where there was just a little, like, there was always something that was just kind of, and I think people could always like figure that out. Like, there was always just something like sexually different about me. Like, it was definitely on the deviant scale somewhere. And for the longest time, like, I remember my parents were super afraid that I would come out as gay. And I'm like, it was one of those things where it's just like, I remember growing up with that. And it was just like, it was always one of those things where it's like, maybe I am. And it turns out, yeah, kind of am. I mean, not gay. I'm definitely bi. But it's just one of those things where it's just like, I remember that. And it took a while for me to grow up and like figure out exactly how all the different pieces of that fit together. And technically, I identify as queer is more of what it is, because I always feel like that is always shifting, like I am married to a man, but I play with women. I've definitely had relationships and sex with women, and I played with people like non-binary people as well. So it's one of those things where it's just like, I don't know, it's just, I think it's very weird with the definitions. I don't know. It's just, I always knew it was that I was always a little bit like, I was definitely never going to be that normal, like that sort of the traditional heteronormative person. Like, even as a child, I think everyone knew that. And there were always rumors around in school about like, what was I? Like, trying to like label me and put me in a box. And it was in high school where I kind of like was starting to learn about it. And like, when I got my own labels and could actually like articulate what it was, that people were like, oh, that's it. I get it now. And it was just like, yeah, I think it was one of those things where like people, once they could have the language of what exactly was quote unquote wrong with me, that they felt more comfortable around me, actually.
I get that. You said the book was The Seven Swan Princess. Is that
yes,
like one of Grimm's fairy tales? Is that?
Yes, it definitely was. Which is why I think that the library just was like, well, it's a children's story. Let's throw it in there. But I don't think anyone actually cracked it open, because I was like, oh, the like evil queen is fully naked in the bath while she's torturing people. Wow.
Is that one of the ones where a king gets lost in the forest and a witch helps him find a way, and then a curse happens where his daughter
maybe
has to...
It's been a really long time. I've looked for this book, and I think I found it once for sale at a library auction, and I was like tempted to go in and actually buy it, but I was like, I'm a little afraid of like re-looking at the book, because I'm like, what if it's just terrible? Like, what if it's just awful? 'Cause the memories I have in my head are like, I remember visually what they look like. and everything. And I vaguely remember the story, but it is just one of those things where it's just like, it was one of those like turning points in your life, I think. And it was just like, I'm afraid to look at it again and figure out why I liked it so much if it's just awful, which I'm assuming it was, because again, the things I remember is that the beautiful, kind of witchy queen who turns the 7 princes into swans. There's one sister there, and she has to weave like nettles into sweaters for her 7 swan brothers, and if she can do it all, then the princes will turn back into humans. But every time she tries,
right?
Huh?
And she has to do it in silence, right?
Yes. Yeah. And then it just, her fingers are bleeding and everything. And I don't, again, like, I think back on it and I'm like, this is horrible. Like, especially again, like, I try as much as possible. Like, if you look at my work, I very much try to stay within the safe, sane, consensual parts of kink. And then I'd look back at like the things that influenced me. I'm like, oh, these were really problematic. These are not good.
I was supposed to read a variation of that in college, and I never did. That was the one book in that English class I never got around to reading. It was the last book of the semester, and it was long.
Yeah.
And I was out of time, and I had gotten near perfect on everything else, so I thought I could BS my way through it.
Absolutely. That's 100% what you do.
Yeah. And I couldn't. I mean, I still got my A, but...
Which is all that matters.
Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking, like, I was a super student in all through grade school, where it was just like, I was very much drilled into me that like, you have to get good grades, otherwise, your life will be awful and it will end terribly and you will just die in the streets. And then I got to college and I was like, it was almost a revelation of how much people did not care.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, I did all that for really nothing.
Also, Heidi, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry for not reading that book in your class. I love the rest of the books and the movies. I was just out of time, and that book was thick, but the rest were great. So, moving on. Yeah, that sounds like, one of those 6 swans, or Udea and her 7 brothers. One of those same theme from that region of Europe books.
Yep. It's probably all based on the same basic story.
Do your parents know what you do, like, professionally?
It's always strange. Like, so we kind of talked a little bit about my friends. 100% all of them know. It's one of those things now where I get, whenever I meet someone new, friend-wise, that's one of the first things that comes up. And especially when I was still dating, it was definitely like, that's going to be a thing that first off, just because I need to weed out the people who are not going to be okay with it. And I'm sort of in the friends and peers group, I've definitely weeded out the people who are just like, oh yeah, this makes you uncomfortable, so you should probably not be around me. With my family and work, it's a little different. Like they know, but it's never talked about.
Yes.
It's just one of those things where it's just like, we're going to what is that Dan Savage had done a thing where it was just like, they have a right not to know.
Yes.
So they know that part exists, but we're just never going to talk about it. Like my mom has definitely, because I have paperback copies of my stuff that just are in the house, because I live with my husband, and then my mother also lives with. So they exist. She has seen them. But and I know, especially during the pandemic, right before the pandemic, because me and my husband were not yet living with each other, because we'd just gotten married just before the pandemic, so we hadn't figured that part out yet. And then the pandemic happened, the world closed, so we hadn't figured that out. So in order to protect my mother, who is elderly and has all sorts of comorbidities, I had sort of quarantined her in my old apartment where she would just stay, and then I was living with my husband over at his place. And so she was in my apartment with all my stuff, including anything that she wanted. If she wanted to snoop, which I know that she loves to do, which I'm assuming that she did, she could find my toys, she could find my books, she could find all that stuff. And so I know she knows. I fully know that she knows. And it is one of those things where she had made a comment early on. She was like, so I was looking for something to read, and your bookshelf is interesting. And I'm like, yes, it is. yes, it is, isn't it? And that is probably the fullest conversation we've ever had about it, is that. And then same thing with my work. I remember early on when I first started, I didn't tell anybody. It was just this thing that existed online, and it just was there. And I remember distinctly, it was like the fifth or sixth story that I got published, and I was really excited. I got it published and everything, and then I would come into work, and all of a sudden my boss, who is the friendliest guy you would ever meet, just suddenly just wouldn't talk to me anymore, couldn't even look me in the face. And I was like, oh, he knows. Oh, he knows. And it's one of those things where, like, again, like I said, I was a super student in school, and so I have that sort of ingrained in me to be a high achiever, and that still goes with me when I'm at my workplace. And it is one of those things where it is true that in a capitalist society, for better or for worse, if you make yourself indispensable, there's really nothing they can do to you. So that just ends up being the thing where it's just like, he couldn't fire me, because if he fired me, who was going to do my job? You weren't going to get anybody who could do what I could do. So he kind of, for a very long time, had to just sort of sit with that disapproval. And eventually, as time went on, realized that, oh, I'm still the person that he knew before. It's just now he knows a little bit more, and he can choose in his own way to just be like, we're just going to set that aside and compartmentalize that bit and just live with this person that I've been working with for all these years and just move on. And I've had to deal with that with not only my boss, but as well as each of the presidents of my company. And then every once in a while, like a coworker will stumble across it and just be like, it'll be that awkward moment where it's just like, our eyes will meet, and then there's just that look on their face of like, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. It's fine. We can deal with this. It's fine. And then you never talk about it. And just eventually they get to that point where they're just like, oh, okay, nothing's actually changed. It's just that I know a little bit more. And it's like, it's fine. It's fine. But I've had to go through that multiple times now that I'm like, it's okay. And I always, in the back of my head, I'm like, you realize that if you stumbled across and found out that I write porn, or that, because there are various pictures of me out online that if people wanted to find, you can find, and not going to be ashamed of that because I put it out there and I'm fine with that. But if you found it, you were looking for that content.
Exactly.
So you can't you can't enjoy the sausage and hate how it was made. So
so true. How did you
I have one, like I have an entire post like that, and I think I have it like pinned on various different social medias where it was very much like that message of, like if you found out that someone that does porn or whatever, like, realize that you went looking for that content. You enjoy that content. So you can't penalize the people who make it.
Exactly. That is very true. How did you get into going to conventions?
Oh, I in advance, I apologize to Khan. I'm so sorry. But one of my friends, she'd been doing it for years. She was in theater with me and all my other friends, and this was very much in like high school, early college, where like we were very invested, I guess, in this idea of like, no, we're not nerds. We're not nerds. Like, we like some nerdy things. We're not nerds, right? And it's just like, she was like, no, you are. It's okay. And then she was just like, you should just come to one of the conventions. And this was back when con was still small. And so she was just like, I'll sneak you in. It's fine. Like, you'll just come in as long as you're in costume, and you love costumes anyway. So you just come in costume. Nobody will question. You're with me. Whatever. If we get into trouble, we'll just talk our way out of it. It'll be fine. So we were like, okay, well, we'll come for like an hour, see what's up, and then we'll probably just like grab lunch and then be done with it. And just like just to see what it is. And we ended up spending the entire weekend there. Like, we just never left. And we like volunteered to do like room duty. Like, she had been working at a room. It was like, oh, what was it? It was the dueling pirate rooms. I remember that. It was like one room had a pirate room where they had booze and cake, and ours had booze and pie. And we were literally separated between one other room, which was in the middle of it was the Ghostbuster room. And
Oh.
so we were doing door duty where you just shout out to people and try to get them to come into the room. And so it was me and my other a theater friend who, again, we're loud and we're theater kids. So we would just be like, "Oi, we have pirate's pie in here. Come inside and try." And like we were doing that kind of thing and like trying to do it. And so the other pirate room was like, "No, we have cake. Come try our cake. It's really good." And like the poor Ghostbuster guy in the middle was like, "We have slime." And so, 3 days of that, and how could I not fall in love with it? So,
Oh my, that is beautiful.
and I remember distinctly, like we had done it so much and so often that even when we were on our break and we were just running around the con, people would yell at us and be like, "Pirate's Pie, girls," and we're like, "Yes!" It was really fun to be like that small brush of fame.
That is beautiful.
And then, like, again, like, we were theater kids, so we love costumes. But then my grandmother, she was a seamstress. And so she had taught me from a very young age how to do that. And she had made all these super elaborate costumes and whatnot. And so I never had to make any of my own clothes while she was sort of still around. So she just would make these amazing costumes. But then when she passed, I didn't have anybody to do that with, but I still had her sewing machine. So I was like, well, I should see if I can do it. Like, I've seen her do it. She taught me how. And so I would try to do it. And then the costumes just got more and more and more and more elaborate. So again, like you said, you were on my Instagram page. So if you look around there, I've got a bunch of my cosplays on there where it's like the centaur girl with the plumbing parts and grocery bags and duct tape, where I actually have a horse body behind me, or the Medusa head where it's like pool noodles and wire and toy snakes.
Those were the two that came to mind first.
Yeah.
It's like you're in my head.
those are the ones I'm most proud of, that I'm just like those were like the dream costumes, because like for the most part for con, so much when you do those costumes you're choosing from like what was big last year in the game, in like the geek community. So I've done like Bowsette when she was big, done Asami from Korra and things like that. So you just sort of pick and choose things that are popular at that time, and then you just sort of make a costume. But those were definitely like on my bucket list of things to do, of like, if I can figure out how to do this, I really want to do it. So those are the ones that I'm super proud of, because they didn't come from anything other than just my desire to see if can I.
Aren't those the best though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that my next bucket list is definitely like a spider girl.
Oh, sweet.
I want to figure out how to do that. That would be definitely very cool.
Do you know which spider girl you're going to go for?
It's always just random. Like, again, like, well, I suppose the centaur was a playoff of the centaur girl in Fantasia, the one where I remember when I was little, I would watch the movie, and she, for whatever reason, just stood out to me, and I loved her. And it was only when I was older that I found out that Fantasia has two versions, the original and then the one that everybody else actually knows. And the original one, ooh, it's rough. It's got some racist stuff in there. And unfortunately, my favorite girl, she got some racist stuff attached to her. And I was like, no, but I love her. And so I did a cosplay blog on her, and I was like, nope, I'm taking her back. No, you can't have her racism. I'm taking her back.
Somehow, I didn't see the redone, with the racism toned down
until
much later, and I was really confused.
I know.
I was like,
and it's just like, why would you even do this? Why would it occur to you that this had to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about the racist bit, and that because all the copies I had initially had it.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
And so
mine definitely did not.
There it is. So I just,
oh my god, no! I was horrified when I found out, because I loved her so much. She's been my like favorite Disney character forever, and then I found out, and I was like, oh, no.
I mean, also growing up with it, at least from my end, having other classics like Gone with the Wind and pretty much any Western and
Song of the South.
Yeah.
Oof. That's rough.
That is rough. So I didn't really think anything of it at the time.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
it's there on the screen. It was made before I was born. Eh.
Yeah, I very much grew up with a sanitized version of Disney and then didn't find out that that was like, I mean, like, I knew, but I had never actually seen any of the really, really problematic stuff until I was older. And it's just like looking back on it, it's just like, yikes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah. And then there's the Medusa costume, which I just sort of I love that character. I think that she's interesting just because she got such a raw deal. She got such a raw deal. Like she gets raped and then she gets punished with snakes on her head and thrown out of her, priestesses, deal, and then or she gets the protection of having the snakes on her head and turning men and anybody she looks at into stone. And I'm like, then she gets vilified as a monster because all these dudes come over there trying to cut her head off and she's the monster. Like, y'all could have just left her alone. She's been through enough.
Yeah, there she is, minding her own business.
Right? And y'all come into her house, try to kill her, and then she defends herself, and she's the monster.
Yeah, that still holds true today.
Yep.
Yeah, society
So,
is,
no.
society
It's
really
always,
needs to be fixed.
it's all about perspectives, like whose eyes are you seeing through? So I always wanted to do her because I love her. So I was like, I want to do a costume of her where she gets to be beautiful, where she doesn't have to be the monster that everybody thinks that she is. She gets to actually be a full-fledged person.
Yeah.
So that was really fun. And then with the Spider Girl, I wrote a short story because you can't even find the full short story. But I have a short story that I'd written for somebody about a Spider Girl. Because I don't have necessarily arachnophobia, but, like most people, spiders kind of make my skin crawl a little bit. I like looking at them. I think they're visually interesting. But if I'm in the same room with one, it makes me a little uncomfortable. And I love, like as a writer, I don't know, I love that state. I think that's always an interesting place to like explore and look at. And so again, I wanted to write a story where it took this thing that we think of as a monster, something that we think of as inherently dangerous, but really isn't, because spiders really aren't. If you leave them alone, they will leave you alone, and that's just what it is. And in logically, I know that, but there's that lizard brain reaction to them that sees them as something dangerous and monstrous. So I was like, I really want to write a story about that. And so I'd written a story about a spider girl who was living through the world and walking through the world, and just what would it be like if every time anybody looked at you, all they saw was the threat. And so I have that short story out, but then a shorter version of it on Circlet Press, and then I fully fleshed that one out into a novella that I'm shopping around, hopefully. But if I can't find a home, it'll be up on my Patreon. So hopefully someday that story will be out in the world, because I really like it.
I hope it gets out there.
Yeah.
It's making me think of, all of a sudden, Kafka's Metamorphosis. Except what happens next?
Yeah.
After the family moves out and leaves them alone in the empty house.
Yeah. Because, it's one of those things. I mean, again, there's that debate, because I have a series, which is the Fair Trade series that I have, which is all like, what if monsters and anything mythical and supernatural actually existed in this world? Like, what would that actually look like if they had to, they had to sort of integrate into our society as fully fledged beings? And so that's what that entire series is. And it's always like taking that idea of, if you were so different, what would it be like to walk the world? And I think that for people of color, that's such a defining part of our existence in America.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's interesting to sort of be able to play with that around and like see what it is. And so much of it is different depending on it. Like, again, like I have one where it's a muse who isn't a monster. She's perfectly, like, she looks human. She essentially is human, but there's just, again, there's that something different about her that the world just doesn't quite trust. And it's always just kind of interesting to play with the different aspects. So like I have that one, and then I have a Beauty and Beast retelling where it's a woman who looks like a monster but isn't one. And she just, what is it like to live in this world where like she was born of human parents and she should be normal, but just she isn't. And what happens? And then there's the spider girl who she lived. She is one of those like really old living beasts that she used to, again, live in her cave. And she was just living around, but she definitely did eat people. She 100% did, and that's how she lived. And what happens when you get thrown into the world and now you have to live with people? What happens?
Yeah, I am looking forward to that.
Yeah, I really want to fit in home for that story. It'll happen one day. If all else fails, there's always Patreon. That's always the thing. Like with the novella story. Oh God, that was a thing. Where and I don't know if you were paying attention to that online. It was a crazy like took all of September, where there was a press out there who was trying very hard to present themselves as being very progressive. And like they did a lot of, I don't know if they're even still around anymore, but they did a lot of like LGBT stuff, characters of size and all that stuff. And they looked really good. And I had some people who, I did mixed reviews. I had some author friends who were like, they're great to work with. And other author friends who were like, ooh, I got sketchy vibes from them. And so I was like, all right, I'm probably never going to work with them. I'm just going to sort of let that go. But then there was a Black trans man who I mean, starting to get, I don't think he's not a big name, but among the indies scene, he's starting to make a name for himself. And he had tweeted out last spring or something like that, and he was like, somebody needs to do a monster fucking anthology. and people were like, oh my God, yes, that is a thing that needs to exist. And it got all this attention. And so this press was like, yeah, no, we want to do this with you. And he's like, great. So they started to do a call out for monster romance stories, monster erotica stories. And I was like, I have one. Because it was supposed to be in a shorter version of it, was supposed to be in another anthology that was going to be Fantastic Beasts and Where to Fuck Them. Mm-hmm. But then J.K. Rowling decided to be a TERF. And so we were like, I don't know if we want to do that as a title anymore. And then, so it just kind of fell apart, and, you know, probably for the best. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd want to be in a novel or in an anthology where that was the title. So I was like, all right, that's fine if it falls apart. And so it fell apart. And then, so I just had the story and I was like, it's done, it's finished, and I just don't have anywhere to put it. So then the call for the monster fucking anthology came out. So I was like, oh, I could just take that story and expand it out into a novella and then send it after that. So I did, because it was getting all this traction, looked really fun. And even though I got sketchy vibes from this particular publisher, I was like, you know what, let's just try it and see. And again, I like, a lot of my stories have that sort of societal political undertone to them anyway, and I was like, they'll never pick it, it's fine, it'll just send it out, I'll get rejected, and it's fine. And then I got accepted. I was like, ooh, yay, and that's gonna come out. And so I usually don't, I try not to put anything out until I know it's 100% going to be out there. So like, sign the contract, it's on its way, I have a pre-buy link. That's generally when I share that I have a story out there. And this was the one time I didn't, where like I saw other people being like, I got an acceptance into this anthology, ooh, I'm excited. So I was like, I saw a bunch of other authors who were involved in it doing it, and I was like, okay, I'll do it this once. And so I had put out the tweet saying like, I'm in it too. And then the next day, literally the next day, that Black trans author went on there and just had receipts and everything of just like, they treated him so badly. Like they were like, we're going to work. They had promised him they were going to work with him, and that this was going to be, you know, it was going to be a shared sort of baby, you know, he was going to be as tied to it as they were. And apparently they just shut him out. And then when he was like, I didn't get to pick which stories were in the anthology, I didn't get to have any say on the cover work, title, anything like that, he just ended up having his story in it. And that was the extent that they did. And he's like, I don't get name credit, I don't get anything, any kind of recognition about this, much less, you know, pay for having been a part of it. And they were like, well, it was just a tweet you sent out. And if you look back, it was like, no, that tweet got way more like responses to it, retweets, likes, everything like that, than anything they put out. So he was clear, and they had advertised it as being it was going to be this shared project that he was going to be a part of. And that was the thing that got people excited. And then they had just been like, it's just a tweet. What do you want? And it was just like, oh, that's not a good look. And then like you read the receipts that he had, and they just had painted him as this angry black man. And it was just like, yeah, don't feel comfortable being part of this anymore. And just en masse, all the authors just backed out. And then even like authors that were working with them that weren't involved in the anthology, but just were tied to that publisher were like, yeah, I'm gonna leave now. Like, this is just, it's not a good look. And you're not somebody who I want to work with, especially if you're going to tout yourself as being progressive and caring about, hearing and listening to voices, voices that aren't usually heard. This is not great. Like, you shouldn't be treating people like this. And so it was just like, oh, don't like that. And so now I had the story again that just didn't have a home. And I was just like, well, I'm just going to put it on Patreon because it had 2 homes that both fell through for one reason or another. And I'm just like, it's just not meant to be. We're just going to put it out. And I'm like, we're just going to put it out for free. And then if you go over there, you can there's a link to both his website as well as to a link that has other work from authors that were involved in the Monster anthology that their stories didn't get through either. So if you check out mine, please check out theirs too.
All right, monster fuckers, you heard her. Get to it. Show them some
yes.
love.
And there's a wide variety of different kinds of stories in there. So some of them look real good. A lot of them are for pre-sale right now. Some of them are out for free, like mine. But yeah, just definitely go check them out. They all look really great.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about your profession?
Oh, I mean, there's 2 different ways to look at that. I think and both of them are kind of common, but in the writing one is that it's easy. I think that so many people, like even now I hear from so many people about the idea that like, oh, I have a book idea that I really want to do. And if I could just do it, then I could get all that money. Or like, especially I think in terms of like the romance side or the erotica is the idea of like, oh yeah, I could make I could make a fortune too if I would just write, those kind of stories. And it's just like, it's so hard. It's so hard and it's so much work involved. And there's so many people involved in doing it that it's always one of those things. Like I've always, whenever I thought about like careers I wanted to be a part of, I was always cursed with being, wanting to be in those careers where it was just so hard to break into. Like when I was young, I wanted to be an actress. And it was that idea of like knowing that if I wanted to be an actress, particularly being an actress of color, like there were going to be only so many roles that I would even be considered for, that I could even go for auditions for. And so it was just like, I was never going to break into it. And so I remember being like 14 or 15 and just having that crushing realization that just, it was never going to happen. Or if it was, it would take so much more connections and glad handing and work than I was willing to put in. So I was like, okay, it's just never going to happen. And then I was like, well, I like writing, so I'm going to try that too. And I think that is the thing I've found is that, again, being a person of color in the writing business, you are seen as marketable in the publishing industry to a very niche group. Like you're just never going to get the marketing campaigns behind you or the publishing houses pay attention to you that if you were a heterosexual white woman.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those things. And it's just, you just hear it all the time. Like, particularly from the white male perspective of just like, like they think that if they weren't, they're not getting their stories published or they're not getting the attention because they're white and male. And it's like, oh, honey, you have no idea what it's like on the other side.
Not at all. Oh, those sad puppies.
Yeah, I think it would just be easier if people just realized it's so much harder than you think it is. Like, and also that I don't know any author who does this full time unless they either are, again, the huge names, which are few and far between. Like, again, like when I did acting, it was one of those things where it was like 10% of the actors in the world make 90% of the money, and that's just always what it's going to be. And that's sort of the same thing in the writing world, where like the big name authors that that is a tiny fraction of the writers that are out in the world trying to make money off of this. And that's just, most of us are never going to be that. But then also the other factor is the people who they just have means to begin with. Like, I have author friends who they don't work. Their only job is being an author, and they get to go to conventions and sell merchandise and do all that stuff because they have either parents, they come from money, or they have a partner who pretty much pays for their lifestyle. And it's just like, I don't have either of those things, so that's just probably not in the cards for me.
I follow you there.
Yeah.
I remember seeing this circulating on social media now and then. Someone saying, if you want to, be a writer, you have to write 5 hours a day, every day.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, yeah, all right. So then there's all this other stuff. So you have a partner at home who does all the cooking and the cleaning and everything so that you can, do that.
So you have the 5 hours to be able to write every day versus everybody else who's got to, cook, clean, have a full-time job, take care of dependents, do whatever. And it's just like, yeah, if I could have 5 hours every day to write, I'm not sleeping then.
Exactly. Yeah, I certainly don't have 5 hours. I live,
No.
I support myself. So, I work, in my home. I have lots of wonderful friends and a loving partner, and, we're a community, but I live myself here, so my space is me taking care of me. With the cooking and the cleaning and getting myself to medical appointments and the working.
Yeah.
There is no 5 hours for that.
No. And then like on top of that, it's the idea of like, because again, like I said, I have another job that pays the bills, and that one you have to do regardless of how you feel. Like you don't really get the choice in that factor, because we live in America, we live in a capitalist society where you just, in order to survive, you have to work. You get up every day and you do it. And that's, I think, most people's conception of what work is that you get up and you do. With writing, with any kind of creative endeavor, like there is a certain amount of that. I've definitely like had deadlines in where I'm just like, all right, you got to get in. You just got to do it. Doesn't have to be good. It just has to be done, kind of deal. But for the most part, like with writing, it really is one of those things where it's just like you have to be in the right headspace to do it, or whatever comes out is just not going to be great. And that's how it is. And if you're living in this world, like especially the past half a decade now, with just the mess we've had to deal with, it's so hard to be able to get into that headspace. Like I just took a break off of writing, where I had like a writing slump where just for like the last week, I'm just like, I'm not gonna write. I'm just gonna do other things. So again, if you've been looking at my Instagram, it's been a lot of knitting and crocheting and sewing, because that's how I'm not writing at that point.
Speaking of headspaces, in the kink community, how is the diversity? Do you find it?
Oh,
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking. I am very vanilla myself, but
I think
all of my kink friends
are white. Yeah, and yeah. I have no problem with that. Again, grew up in Minnesota. Most of everywhere I'm wherever I'm at, most of it's white, and that's perfectly fine. That's just what my life is, and for the most part, that's fine. It's always that, again, it goes back to what we've kind of talked about before, is that I think with kink particularly, there's a very specific tie with race in it already, inherently, like just baked into it. Whenever you play with power dynamics, there's always going to be a power differential between white people and people of color. That's the nature of our society. And I think kink has done a very good job in the last, again, like half a decade, where they've had to be very introspective about that and had to think about that. Because I think for a lot of white people, they hadn't thought about race in a very consequential way until then. And when all of a sudden it started to become a national conversation that they had to listen to, they hadn't really thought about it. Because I remember getting into it, ooh, God, I have a saying, if you look at my work, where it's just like, I never mind if a person has an Asian fetish. If you have an Asian fetish, that's fine. If you grew up on anime and you really, that's the dynamic you really like, that's fine. I'm not judging you for it. Where I judge you is if you treat actual Asian people like they are a fetish. That's where I draw the line. And ooh, God, when I first got into the community, the number of people who would and it's very uncomfortable. Like, if you walk in, particularly, again, small cute Asian girl, and then you walk in and the assumptions made, and it's on all sides. Like, again, you get a lot of the, like, they look at you and automatically think, oh, cute small Asian girl must be a submissive. I get that a lot. And then I also, because I have resting bitch face and am very opinionated, I also get the, oh, Asian girl must be a dom. And I'm like, oh, honey, no. I am neither of those things. If you are expecting that, you are going to be so very disappointed. So I've definitely had to have that conversation with quite a few people, of unpacking that with them, of the expectation of just like, oh, if that's what you're here for, you're gonna have to go find that with somebody else, because it's not happening here. I am here for other reasons.
That damn colonialism.
Yeah, again, I do think that the kink community is getting better and I think a lot of it is because there are more people of color getting into the community. Because for a very long time, it very much was, again, it felt like going back to grade school where I was one of like 5 people of color, and usually Asian girls. That's generally how it was. And again, like, most of the time I was the darkest skinned person in the room a lot of the time, because again, I'm a darker skinned Asian girl. So it was just, you would get a lot of people who would look at you and be like, ooh, new, exotic. And you're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
I don't play those games. It's cute. Like, if you want to, and you negotiate and you get consent from whoever you're playing with and they're cool with it, go forth with my blessing. But you gotta get my consent before you start doing this, and I'm just gonna tell you right now, that's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, consent is mandatory, people.
Yes.
So remember that. Teach your children that.
Yes, please.
Not only does no mean no, but you need an enthusiastic yes.
Yes. I'm also a big proponent of that. Consent is a conversation, not a word.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And it's something that's always ongoing. It can change anytime for any reason. And that's what it is. Like, we need to teach people that consent is something you get constantly, over and over and over again. That's just, it's always going to be something that you're going to have to deal with asking for and giving.
Yes, it is for sure that 100%.
Yeah.
People are having such a hard time learning that.
Yeah. And I think it's just because, again, like, you look at media that we've had, and I'm guilty of this too. God, thank God for editors, where we've seen implied consent a lot, where it's just like someone gives you that look, or, you know, there's the body language in there. And it's that reminder, because we've all grown up with that in movies and books and everything like that, where they didn't ever talk about it. They just sort of, it was implied and it was understood, and that was how the sexy happened. And we have to get into that habit of being like, no, there should be an actual conversation, like, actually say it. Because whatever you think, like, the common response to that is always like, well, it's awkward, I don't want to talk about it. And it's just like, okay, yeah, talking about it can be awkward. You can also make it not awkward, but it can be awkward. I'm not going to deny that. But is it more or less awkward than crossing someone's boundary?
Exactly.
Because I think you would rather just have the awkward conversation. Like, just have the awkwardness and it'll pass. Like, whatever that awkwardness is, that awkwardness will pass. You will get your answer, yes or no, or let's do this or that. And that's your answer. And then you can get on with the sexy times. But if you cross someone's boundary, that awkwardness lasts.
For a very long time.
For a very long, and on both sides. Like, yeah, like, you could have hurt somebody and they have to live with that for the rest of their life. And now you have to live with the idea that you just hurt somebody for the rest of your life. maybe let's just have the smaller awkwardness first.
Yeah, precisely. So, were there no black kids at your school, since you were one of the darkest kids?
For a lot of it, there was not. I think I had one black classmate really early in grade school, and then didn't again until high school. And then there were a lot more in high school where there were a lot more black kids there. But I had grown up in a smaller suburb. And
Right. You had
yeah,
told me that before. I'd forgotten.
yeah, it was a smaller suburb. So yeah, for a lot of people, again, I was and I talk about this a lot where like and it's weird that like I both understand that it's a weird thing that happens, but it's also one of those things where it's just like it's just always been my experience where like for a lot of people I am the first person of color that they are really encountering. Like they may have seen people of color, like obviously you see them in media now or you see them out and about, but for a lot of people in my life I am the first person of color that they are actually interacting with on a constant basis, where like again they get to see me as not just person out in the world but person, you know. And it's just it's always just sort of one of those weird things that happens.
Hey, folks. So, we had a lot to say, and things ran long. So stay tuned until next time for part 2.